My name is Rosalind, and I learned that the fiercest battles are not fought with fists, bullets, or loud declarations. They are fought in whispers, in signatures that carry more weight than any weapon, and in secrets that lie hidden in plain sight until someone desperate enough digs them up. The beginning of my story was not a violent storm or a dramatic explosion. It was the quiet light of a late summer afternoon. The kind of day that tricks you into believing nothing could ever go wrong. The Texas sky stretched wide above the rolling pastures of my family ranch, golden and endless. The smell of hay mixed with dust, and the cicadas sang in the heat. I remember thinking as I walked the worn wooden fence line that evening, that this land was more than property. It was memory. It was my father's hands, blistered from decades of work. It was my childhood laughter echoing across the barns. It was our name carved into the foundation of the ranch house itself. But to outsiders it was simply a number: $8.5 million. That was the appraised value of the land, the livestock, the structures, the water rights, and every acre that stretched out beyond what the eye could see. To me this land was home. To my husband, Ethan, it was opportunity. When I first met him I believed his words. He was charming, magnetic, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone turn their head. He said all the right things. He told me he admired that I lived for tradition, not wealth. He swore he loved me for my strength, not my inheritance. He promised he wanted to build a life with me, not off me. I wanted to believe him, and for years I did. But greed wears many masks, and Ethan's mask was love. It began slowly. At first, he spoke about the ranch with admiration. He said he loved the wide open skies, the sound of the cattle in the distance, the sunsets that turned the fields red. Then his tone shifted. He began asking practical questions. How many acres does the ranch truly cover? What is the yield from the cattle each year? How much do the taxes drain from the profits? At dinner one evening, he laughed as he reached for my hand. "Rosalind," he said lightly, "it would be easier if you just signed the deed over to me. Let me handle the business side. You should not worry about the stress." I had laughed too, because what else could I do? I brushed it off as a harmless joke. But deep down something cold pressed against me. Love can be a blindfold, and I had tied mine tightly. My father was still alive then. He was older, his frame thinner, his hands trembling when he lifted his teacup. But his mind was as sharp as barbed wire. Every evening, he sat on the porch with a blanket across his knees, sipping sweet tea, staring out at the land as if memorizing each blade of grass before his time came. Ethan often sat with him, smiling and nodding, pretending to be the perfect son-in-law. He listened to stories about branding cattle, about the drought of 1984, about the day the first barn caught fire and was rebuilt from ashes. Ethan nodded with reverence, but behind his eyes I sometimes caught a glint, calculation, not affection. The night my father coughed blood into his handkerchief, I was the one who rushed to his side. I was the one who felt my chest tighten with fear. But Ethan's expression flickered. Not with sorrow, not with worry, but with something colder. I saw it before he masked it with a frown. For just a moment, his eyes sharpened like a man watching a door finally begin to open. At the time I told myself it was nothing. I convinced myself that grief could make people react strangely, that maybe I had imagined it. That is the problem with love. It explains away what should never be ignored. Still the moments stacked. Comments about how we could double the herd if only we invested properly. Suggestions that we sell part of the land to make things easier. Gentle but persistent nudges that perhaps the ranch should be legally tied to both our names, for security. Each time I shook my head, insisting that my father's wishes were clear. The ranch was family, not a business. It would pass to me as it had been planned. Ethan smiled, but I saw the stiffness in his jaw. I had no idea then that those smiles were simply weapons, polished and sharpened for the day. He would use them against me. The morning my father passed, the house was unnaturally still. No birdsong, no whine through the trees. Just silence. I sat in my childhood bedroom, tears soaking the same quilt my grandmother had sewn. Grief weighed on me like an iron chain. And that was the very moment Ethan chose to reveal the truth. He was not thinking about loss. He was not thinking about love. He was thinking about the ranch, about ownership, about control. Before my father's body was even taken from the house, Ethan was already making calls. His voice was firm, businesslike, stripped of all compassion. He told me flatly that the ranch would be better in his hands. He promised he would fight for it. Those words, so sharp and merciless, cut deeper than my grief. I stared at the man I had married, the man I thought I knew, and for the first time, I felt a kind of fear that no widowhood could ever bring. Because I realized, in that hollow mourning of loss, that Ethan had not just married me. He had been waiting, calculating for this moment. And his betrayal was about to tear open a war before the funeral even began. The day after my father's death should have been filled with silence and prayer. Neighbors brought casseroles. Old ranch hands shook my hand, their eyes red with grief. The air smelled of cut hay and lilies from the church, and the house echoed with footsteps that did not belong to my father anymore. I moved through the rooms like a shadow. Every corner reminded me of him. The leather chair by the window, the boots still lying near the door, the sound of his voice that I half expected to call me from the porch. But Ethan was not mourning. While I wept in my room, he was downstairs in the study, rifling through drawers. I heard the slam of wood against wood, the scrape of papers being pulled from files. By the time I entered, his face was lit not with sorrow but with purpose. "Rosalind," he said without hesitation, "you know the ranch will be better in my hands. I can run it. I can expand it. I can make it worth twice as much. You do not have the stomach for this. You should grieve and let me take over." I blinked at him, my mind struggling to make sense of the words. My father's bed was still warm upstairs, and already my husband was declaring himself master of the ranch. I whispered, "Ethan, how could you? This is my family's land, not yours." His lips curled into a smile that carried no warmth. "It is ours now. What is yours is mine. That was our vow. Or have you forgotten the promises you made at the altar?" Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. A man in a pressed suit entered, carrying a leather briefcase. Ethan had summoned a lawyer. He had not waited a week or even a day to begin the battle. I stood frozen as the lawyer unfolded papers across the desk. Ethan had already filed a claim. He intended to contest the inheritance, insisting that by law, as my husband, he had equal right to the ranch. The betrayal was not whispered in secret. It was shouted through contracts and signatures, ink already drying while I clutched the edges of the table to keep myself upright. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Harland believes it is in the best interest of the estate that he assume control." "Mr. Harland," I repeated, staring at Ethan, "you are not my father's heir. You are my husband." He leaned back in the chair, hands clasped behind his head, arrogance radiating from every movement. "You will thank me one day. You cannot handle this. I will not let you ruin $8.5 million of land because of nostalgia." His words burned. My father had entrusted the ranch to me because he knew I could protect it. And here was the man I had loved, telling me I was incapable, telling me that my blood meant less than his ambition. That night, after the lawyer left, Ethan poured himself a drink and stood at the window, watching the land as if it already belonged to him. "I will fight you, Rosalind," he said calmly. "If it takes months, if it takes years, I will fight until this ranch is mine." Something inside me broke, but not in the way he expected. He thought grief would weaken me, that his timing would crush me. Instead, I felt a cold clarity settle into my chest. If he wanted a fight, I would give him one. But I had no idea yet how deep his treachery ran. The very next morning, when I entered my father's study to gather documents for the funeral, I found something Ethan had overlooked. At the bottom of a drawer, hidden beneath stacks of tax records, was an envelope marked in my father's careful handwriting. My hand shook as I pulled it out. The paper was yellowed, the ink fading. I unfolded it slowly and my breath caught. It was a legal document dated nearly 20 years earlier, something Ethan clearly did not know existed. My father had placed the ranch into a trust. It was protected, sealed beyond the reach of marriage or manipulation. By law it would pass to me alone. Ethan had no claim. Relief and rage collided inside me. The betrayal had been unveiled, but so had my weapon. He thought he could fight me into submission. He had no idea the battle was already lost, if I dared to play my cards right. I clutched the envelope to my chest, knowing that this single piece of paper could destroy Ethan's dreams. But I also knew him too well. He would not stop, not even when the law stood in his way. I held that envelope as if it were a lifeline. My father's handwriting, steady and precise, spelled out his final safeguard. The ranch had been placed into a family trust nearly 20 years earlier. The terms were clear. Ownership could never transfer by marriage, nor could it be claimed by an outsider. The ranch belonged to me and to me alone. It was as if my father had known that someday, someone would try to tear it away. Perhaps he had seen through Ethan's charm in ways I had ignored. Perhaps this was his way of protecting me long after he was gone. I sat on the floor of the study, reading the document over and over, my tears smudging the ink. Relief surged through me, but so did a deeper, sharper fury. Ethan had already summoned lawyers, already painted himself as the rightful heir. He thought he could crush me beneath paperwork and intimidation. He thought my grief would paralyze me. But grief had turned into something else, something colder, steadier. The first thing I did was make copies. I drove into town that afternoon, my hands tight around the steering wheel, and found an office supply store with a copier in the back. The clerk did not know he was witnessing the beginning of a war. I slipped the pages under the glass, the hum of the machine loud in the empty shop, and made 3 duplicates. One I placed in a safety deposit box at the bank. Another I sealed in an envelope and left with my lawyer, Margaret, who had already begun to advise me. The third I kept tucked deep in my purse, folded carefully inside a leather wallet. The original I returned to the study, hiding it in a place Ethan would never think to look, inside one of my father's old ledgers, among pages of numbers and cattle sales too boring for Ethan's eyes. That night, Ethan returned home late. His tie was loosened, his smile sharp. He poured himself bourbon and leaned against the counter. "I spoke to another attorney today," he said casually. "They agree I have a strong case. It may take time, but eventually the ranch will be in my name." I forced myself to meet his gaze without trembling. "And what if the law does not agree?" He smirked, sipping his drink. "Then I will make it agree. Money talks louder than sentiment, Rosalind. You will learn that." His arrogance curdled the air. I knew then that Ethan would not stop, even if he lost in court. He would twist, manipulate, push until he found another way. The following days became a silent battle of wills. I kept the document close, never letting it out of my sight when Ethan was near. He prowled the study, opening drawers, scanning ledgers, as if he could smell that something was hidden there. Twice I caught him rifling through my father's files. He looked up at me with a practiced smile. "Just familiarizing myself with the paperwork," he said. But I saw the frustration tightening his jaw. He sensed I was keeping something from him. Each night I lay awake, listening to his footsteps echo downstairs, his phone calls in low voices. He thought I was asleep, but I could hear enough to know he was strategizing. Words like transfer, petition, and executor floated up through the vents, filling my chest with dread. I began writing everything down. Every comment he made, every move he took, every lie he told. I created a record, my own shield against the storm he was building. Yet no amount of preparation stopped the unease that shadowed me. One evening I returned from the barn to find the study in disarray. Drawers yanked open, papers scattered, Ethan standing in the middle of the room. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. He held an empty envelope in his hand. Not the one with the trust, but another, torn and crumpled. He glared at me. "Where is it, Rosalind? Do not play games. I know your father left something. Where did you hide it?" My pulse thundered, but I steadied my voice. "You are imagining things." His laugh was low, bitter. "You are not as clever as you think. I will find it." That was the moment I understood how far he was willing to go. This was no longer about paperwork. This was obsession. He would tear the house apart, tear me apart, to feed his hunger for control. I left the room with my heart racing, the copy of the trust pressed against my ribs in my purse. He had not found it. Not yet. But his desperation was growing, and desperation makes men dangerous. I thought the document in my purse would keep me safe. But I was wrong. Because the very next night, Ethan crossed a line that turned our home into a battlefield. And I realized I could no longer fight this war alone. By the time Ethan turned the study upside down, scattering my father's papers like fallen leaves, I knew one truth with absolute certainty. I could not fight him alone. His obsession had already swallowed the man I thought I married. The way his eyes flashed when he demanded, "Where is it?" told me this was no longer about partnership or even marriage. This was conquest. That night, I sat in the quiet of my childhood bedroom and dialed the number of the one person who had never failed me. My sister, Clarissa. She answered on the second ring, her voice firm, steady like the crack of a whip. "Rosalind, what happened? I heard about Ethan's petition. Tell me it's not true." I tried to speak but my voice caught. Finally I whispered, "He wants the ranch. He's tearing the house apart to find documents. He says he'll fight me until it's his." There was silence for only a beat before Clarissa replied, "Pack a bag if you need to. I'm driving down tonight." By morning she was in the kitchen, her hair tied back, her arms crossed, fury in her eyes. "That man is poison, Rosalind. I told you from the beginning he looked at this land with hunger. I saw it the first Thanksgiving when he couldn't stop asking about cattle numbers instead of family stories." I sighed, rubbing my temples. I wanted to believe he loved me for me, not for this. Clarissa softened, pulling me into a hug. "We will not let him take it. Not after what Dad worked for. Not after what you've lost." Together we drove into town to meet with Margaret Jennings, a lawyer who had handled ranch disputes for half her career. Her office smelled of leather and old books, her desk stacked with files like fortresses. She adjusted her glasses as she read the trust agreement I had uncovered. When she finished, she leaned back with a rare, satisfied smile. "This is airtight. Ethan has no claim. The ranch cannot pass to him, no matter what argument he makes. The law is clear. But he will not take this quietly. Expect lies. Expect pressure. He may even try intimidation." Clarissa leaned forward. "Then what's our move?" Margaret tapped the papers. "We prepare for war. We document everything. Every threat, every trespass, every lie he spreads. We keep your evidence safe. And Rosalind," she looked at me sharply, "you keep yourself safe. Men like Ethan, when cornered, do not shrink. They strike." Her warning echoed in my chest. I had already seen the desperation in Ethan's eyes, the way he prowled the house at night like a predator searching for prey. Over the next days, Clarissa stayed by my side. She locked the doors when Ethan went out. She helped me organize the documents into binders. She placed cameras discreetly near the study and the barn, determined to catch any attempt Ethan might make to steal or destroy evidence. But Ethan sensed the shift. He noticed the way Clarissa's eyes narrowed at him, the way I no longer flinched under his threats. His mask of charm began to slip. One evening, as the three of us sat at dinner, he set down his glass with a sharp clink and said, "This is my house too, you know. You cannot gang up on me in my own home." Clarissa shot back before I could speak. "This was never your house, Ethan. It was our father's, and it will be Rosalind's. You are just a guest who overstayed his welcome." His face reddened, but he forced a smile. "We'll see what the court says." That night, after Clarissa had gone upstairs, I walked past the study and froze. Ethan was standing in the dark, staring out the window toward the pastures. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass. He spoke without turning. "You think you can beat me with one piece of paper? You don't know what I'm capable of, Rosalind." His voice was soft, almost tender, but it chilled me more than if he had shouted. I backed away quietly, my pulse hammering. Clarissa was right. Margaret was right. This was no longer about law alone. Ethan would go further, darker, if it meant control. And sure enough, within days he proved it. Because when I returned home one evening, I found the study ransacked again. Only this time, Ethan was standing in the middle of the chaos, holding the very envelope where I had once hidden the trust. His eyes met mine, blazing with triumph. Ethan stood in the middle of my father's study, his knuckles white as he gripped the old envelope. Pages of ledgers and receipts littered the floor like fallen leaves. His eyes blazed when he looked at me. "I knew it," he hissed. "Your father left something. Where is it? What are you hiding from me?" I forced myself to breathe evenly. The envelope in his hand was empty, an old one I had used years ago. He had not found the trust, not yet. But the madness in his voice told me he would not stop until he did. That night, after he finally stormed out to meet one of his so-called advisors, I sat at the kitchen table with Clarissa. She had seen the fury in his eyes, and her own face was pale with anger. "We cannot just react anymore," she said. "We have to take control. He is spiraling, Rosalind. If we do not outsmart him, he will burn everything down just to watch you lose." I nodded, the weight of her words settling deep. "Then we build a plan. We do not just defend. We strike back." The next morning we drove into town to Margaret's office. She listened quietly as we described Ethan's latest search, his threats, his obsession. Her sharp eyes flickered with understanding. "This is not unusual," she said calmly. "When a man like Ethan senses he is losing power, he grows reckless. That recklessness can be his undoing, if we guide it correctly." Clarissa leaned forward. "So what is our move?" Margaret folded her hands over the trust agreement. "First, we secure this document beyond his reach. Copies are already safe, but we must prepare for the possibility that he will try to discredit it. I will petition the court to officially recognize the trust before Ethan can twist the narrative. That locks him out legally." I exhaled slowly. "And if he tries to ruin me in the meantime?" Her smile was thin, almost predatory. "Then we let him hang himself. Document his threats. Record his words. Gather witnesses. The more desperate he becomes, the more evidence he gives us. When the time comes, we will present him not as a husband fighting fairly, but as a greedy man who tried to steal what was never his." The strategy settled into my bones like steel. For weeks, I had been reacting to Ethan's moves, always on defense. But now, for the first time, I saw the path to turning his greed against him. Clarissa became my second pair of eyes. She recorded his late-night phone calls when he forgot to lower his voice. She photographed the study after each of his rampages. She saved the receipts when he withdrew money from our joint account to pay lawyers behind my back. I began writing daily logs, noting the time and content of every threat. Ethan thought his words dissolved into the air, but they were inked permanently in my journal. And Margaret prepared the filings. She explained each step, her voice steady, her manner unshakable. "We will not ambush him until the timing is perfect," she said. "Let him dig his own grave first." At home, Ethan grew bolder. He brought strangers to the ranch, men in suits who walked the property with greedy eyes, pointing at barns and fields as though they already owned them. He never introduced me. He never asked my permission. One evening I confronted him. "You have no right to bring them here. This is my land." He laughed, pouring himself another drink. "Our land, Rosalind. And soon it will be mine to manage as I see fit. They are investors. Visionaries. Unlike you, they understand opportunity." My blood boiled, but I held my tongue. For every word he spoke, for every arrogant gesture, I had a witness. Clarissa stood silently in the doorway, her phone recording. The counterplan was simple but deadly. Let him overreach, let him boast, let him expose himself. Then strike with the truth. And yet, as the weeks passed, unease gnawed at me. Ethan was cunning. He sensed resistance in the walls around him. I caught him watching me with narrowed eyes, suspicion tightening his face. One night as I locked the bedroom door, a habit I had never needed before, I heard him on the phone downstairs. His voice was low, dangerous. "She thinks she has me cornered. She has no idea what I am capable of. If I have to ruin her reputation, I will. If I have to drag her name through every courtroom in Texas, I will." My hand trembled on the doorknob. Clarissa's words echoed in my head. "He will burn everything down just to watch you lose." I knew then that our counterplan had to move faster. Margaret was filing motions, Clarissa was gathering proof, but Ethan was already planning something darker. And soon enough he made his move, one so reckless, so unexpected. It threatened to unravel everything we had built. The day of the court's preliminary hearing was supposed to be simple. Margaret had prepared every detail. The trust agreement was filed, copies notarized, and our evidence stacked neatly in binders. Clarissa was ready with photographs, recordings, and a timeline of Ethan's lies. We were not walking into battle empty-handed. We were carrying the truth. But Ethan was never a man who fought fair. That morning, as I stood in front of the mirror fastening my black blazer, my stomach churned. It was not nerves from the courtroom. It was something deeper, a gnawing sense that Ethan would not simply show up and argue his case. He had been too quiet the night before, too composed after weeks of seething. When a storm goes silent, you know the lightning is about to strike. We arrived at the courthouse, the old brick building casting long shadows across the parking lot. Clarissa squeezed my hand. No matter what happens, remember, we have the truth. But the moment we stepped inside, I realized Ethan had prepared a show. Reporters crowded the hallway, cameras flashing, microphones stretching forward like weapons. Headlines already blared from their lips. Local widow accused of hiding assets from husband. Ranch fortune in question. My breath caught. Ethan had called the press. He had painted me as a greedy widow, exploiting her dead father's estate to keep her husband from his rightful share. The whispers of strangers cut like knives as I walked past. And then I saw him. Ethan stood near the courtroom doors in a crisp suit, his arm draped casually around a woman I had never seen before. She was younger, polished, with a sharp smile that gleamed like a blade. "Rosalind," he said smoothly, his voice carrying so everyone could hear. "Meet my fiancée, Victoria. We plan to run the ranch together, once the court gives us what is ours." Gasps rippled through the hallway. My knees nearly buckled. He had not only betrayed me, he had staged a public humiliation. The cameras clicked wildly, capturing my shock. Ethan's smile widened, feeding on my silence. Clarissa stepped forward, fury blazing in her eyes. "You shameless liar." I grabbed her arm, forcing myself to breathe. We could not lose control. Not here. Not with the world watching. Inside the courtroom, the ambush continued. Ethan's lawyer presented fabricated emails, claiming they showed I had planned to sell the ranch in secret. He accused me of fraud, of dishonoring my father's legacy, of hiding documents to cut Ethan out. Each accusation hit like a hammer, designed to shake the judge's perception before Margaret even spoke. But Margaret was unshakable. She rose slowly, adjusted her glasses, and presented the trust. Her voice was calm, firm, slicing through Ethan's theatrics. "This document, signed and notarized 2 decades ago, makes it clear. The ranch is not marital property. It is protected. Mr. Harland cannot claim ownership by marriage. The law does not bend to greed." The judge leaned forward, studying the pages. My heart pounded. For a moment the room was utterly still. Then Ethan stood, slamming his palm on the table. His mask cracked. "That paper is a lie. She forged it. She is desperate to keep me from what is mine." Gasps filled the courtroom. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, but Ethan shook him off, his face red, his voice trembling with rage. "I will not let her win. I will not let her steal my future." The judge's gavel struck, calling for order. But in that chaos I understood something chilling. Ethan did not care if he lost in court. He was playing another game. He wanted to destroy me publicly, to ruin my name so thoroughly that even if the ranch remained mine, I would stand on it alone, shamed and broken. That realization cut deeper than any legal battle. As we left the courthouse, cameras flashing, Ethan's voice carried after me. "Enjoy your victory, Rosalind. It will not last. I always find another way." Clarissa hissed beside me. "He is unraveling." Margaret's expression was grim. "Yes, and that makes him more dangerous than ever. Prepare yourself, Rosalind. The fight is no longer just in court." That night, as I locked the doors of the ranch house, headlights swept across the driveway. A car slowed, paused, then drove away. My skin prickled with unease. Ethan was escalating. His courtroom ambush had not broken me, so now he would push further. And I was right, because the next morning I discovered that Ethan had already set his next trap, one that could cost me not only the ranch but my freedom. The morning after the courthouse spectacle, I found the first sign of Ethan's next move. An envelope had been slid under the front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a printed notice, an anonymous tip claiming I had falsified financial records to hide assets. It accused me of laundering money through ranch operations. And at the bottom in thick black ink was a single word: fraud. Clarissa slammed the paper down on the table. "He is trying to frame you. This is harassment, Rosalind. He wants to bury you in scandal so no one will care about the truth." Margaret studied the letter with cold precision. It isn't signed, but Ethan is behind it. This is exactly the kind of reckless gamble desperate men make. The good news? Plays right into our hands. I frowned. How can lies help us? She smiled faintly. Because lies leave trails. If he is foolish enough to circulate forgeries and anonymous accusations, we can trace them. Judges hate manipulation, especially when it undermines the court. But we must let him think he is winning. And so the trap began to close. That week, Ethan doubled down. He leaked stories to local reporters, whispering that I was hiding millions. He staged tours of the ranch with supposed investors, boasting about his future ownership. He even had Victoria, the woman he paraded at court, claim on social media that she would soon be co-managing the property. The humiliation was suffocating. I could not step into town without hearing whispers. Yet every cruel word, every false claim was logged, recorded, and handed to Margaret. Piece by piece, Ethan built his own gallows. The final blow came when Ethan attempted to file new papers in court, alleging that the trust agreement itself was a forgery. He claimed my father had never signed it, that I had fabricated it after his death. For a moment, fear clawed at my chest. What if the court believed him? What if his lies drowned out the truth? But Margaret was ready. On the day of the hearing, she rose with calm authority and presented witnesses who had been there when my father signed the trust 2 decades earlier. Old ranch hands, a banker, even the notary herself, all testified under oath that the document was genuine. Then Margaret delivered the final strike. She presented Ethan's anonymous letters, traced back through a print shop receipt he had carelessly left on a joint credit card. She played recordings Clarissa had captured of him boasting about making her crack and ruining her reputation. The courtroom fell silent as Ethan's own words filled the air. I watched his face crumble. For the first time, the arrogance drained from his expression, replaced by raw panic. Margaret's voice cut through the silence. Your Honor, this is not a husband seeking fairness. This is a man attempting theft through intimidation, deception, and fraud. The trust is valid. The ranch belongs solely to Rosalind. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. The court recognizes the trust as binding. Mr. Harlan's claims are dismissed. Further, this court will consider sanctions for harassment and malicious filings. Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan staggered back, his lawyer burying his face in his hands. But I was not finished. I rose slowly, my voice steady. You thought you could erase my father's legacy, Ethan. You thought you could break me with lies. But you forgot one thing: this land is not just property. It is history. It is truth. And truth does not bend to greed. The cameras outside captured every word, every tear in my eyes, every tremor in Ethan's clenched fists. For once, the headlines belonged to me, not his performance. Ethan tried to shove past reporters, his voice cracking with rage. This is not over. She will pay for this. But the world had already turned against him. His carefully built facade shattered in public. Victoria slipped away into the crowd, leaving him alone. His allies melted into silence. His empire of lies collapsed with a single swing of the gavel. Still, even as victory washed over me, a shadow of unease lingered. Men like Ethan did not surrender quietly. He had been humiliated, stripped of his power, but his eyes still burned with hatred. And I was right to fear, because within hours of his defeat, Ethan struck back in the most reckless way yet, igniting a chain of events none of us could control. The moment we stepped out of the courthouse after the ruling, the air crackled like a storm about to break. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing, questions hurled like stones. Clarissa gripped my arm, shielding me from the chaos. Margaret pushed us forward with calm authority. And then Ethan's voice cut through the crowd like a whip. She lied. She cheated. You will all see, this is not finished. His face was crimson, sweat shining on his forehead, his hands trembling with fury. The cameras turned on him instantly, hungry for the spectacle. He jabbed a finger toward me, his words spiraling louder. She stole everything from me. That ranch is mine. She will regret this. The crowd gasped, some backing away from his wild gestures. A reporter shouted, Mr. Harlan, the court just ruled against you. How do you respond? Ethan snarled into the microphone. The court is wrong. The judge is corrupt. She set me up. They are all against me. The footage played across local news before we even reached the car. By evening, his meltdown was everywhere: television, online articles, even whispers in the grocery store aisles. People who once respected him now shook their heads. Neighbors called him unstable, unhinged. But Ethan did not stop. That night, he returned to the ranch. His truck roared up the driveway, headlights glaring through the windows. Clarissa and I stood frozen as he pounded on the front door, his shouts echoing through the night. "Rosalind, come out here. You think you can humiliate me? You think you can destroy me?" I dialed the sheriff's office with shaking hands. By the time deputies arrived, Ethan was in the yard, screaming into the darkness. They restrained him, warning him to leave. He fought against them, shouting that this was his land, that no one could keep him away. Clarissa stood beside me, arms wrapped tight around herself. "He has lost his mind," she whispered. The deputies escorted him off the property, but his words lingered long after the red and blue lights disappeared down the road. "This is not over. I will burn it all down before I let her win." The next day, the fallout spread further. Investors he had bragged to cut ties immediately, calling Margaret to confirm that the ranch was not his. Victoria, the woman he had flaunted at court, posted online that she wanted nothing more to do with him. His law firm withdrew representation, citing irreconcilable differences. His world crumbled piece by piece, yet his obsession with me only sharpened. He began circling the property at night, his truck crawling past the gates, headlights sweeping over the house like a predator's eyes. The ranch hands noticed. "Ma'am," one of them said quietly, "we've worked here for decades. If you want us to keep watch at night, we will. That man is dangerous." Their loyalty warmed me, but it did little to ease the dread. Each time I heard an engine in the distance, my chest tightened. Each time a floorboard creaked at night, I reached for the phone, half expecting Ethan to burst through the door. Clarissa stayed close, her presence an anchor. Margaret filed for a restraining order, warning me to document every sighting, every threat. But Ethan's unraveling was not contained by paper. On the third night after his defeat, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. My heart leapt into my throat. Clarissa rushed into the hallway as I grabbed the phone. We found the living room window broken, shards glittering across the floor. A rock lay in the center of the carpet, wrapped in paper. On it, scrawled in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "If I cannot have it, no one will." The deputies came again, their faces grim. They promised to patrol the area to keep watch. But fear had already settled in my bones. For all his public humiliation, Ethan was not done fighting. He was cornered, desperate, stripped of everything but his rage. And I realized with chilling certainty that the most dangerous chapter was still ahead, because a man with nothing left to lose is capable of anything. The morning after the rock shattered our window, sunlight felt different. It streamed across the broken glass still scattered on the living room floor, glittering like cruel reminders of the night before. Clarissa swept carefully, her movements sharp with anger, while I sat at the table staring at the sheriff's written report. The deputies had taken the rock and note as evidence. They promised to increase patrols around the ranch, but I could still hear Ethan's words in my head. "If I cannot have it, no one will." It was no longer just a threat against my inheritance. It was a threat against my safety, against the land itself. Clarissa slammed the broom down. "Enough of this. He will not stop until someone forces him. He should be in jail, Rosalind." Her voice cracked, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in her eyes. My sister, always the strong one, was shaken. That realization settled a fire in my chest. By mid-morning, Margaret arrived. She studied the police report, her jaw tight. "This crosses a line. We are no longer talking about legal disputes or reputational attacks. This is criminal behavior. I will file for a permanent restraining order today. And with this evidence, we can push for charges: harassment, vandalism, intimidation. He will face consequences beyond losing the ranch." I nodded, though dread lingered. Ethan had already lost his case in court, lost his fiancée, lost his lawyers, lost his reputation. Pushing him further might only enrage him more. But what choice did I have? Silence was surrender, And I would not surrender my father's legacy. News of the broken window spread quickly. Neighbors called to check on us. Ranch hands offered to patrol the property in shifts. Even the pastor from the local church stopped by. His voice gentle but steady. "Rosalind, you are not alone in this." The whole community saw his outburst in court. They know who he is now. And they know who you are. Do not let his rage make you forget your strength. For the first time I felt the tide turning, not just legally but in spirit. Ethan's image as a successful, charming man had crumbled. People who once praised him now crossed the street to avoid him. He had become an outcast, whispered about in diners and feed stores, pitied by some, feared by others. By afternoon, Margaret called with news. The judge has granted an emergency hearing. With last night's evidence, the court is ready to consider criminal charges. We need you present tomorrow. My heart pounded. Do you think this will end it? Her voice was firm. Yes. This is the beginning of his end. But be prepared. Men like Ethan sometimes lash out hardest when the walls close in. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. But dawn came, and with it, a new sense of resolve. The next day, in the courthouse once again, Ethan arrived late. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He looked less like the confident man who once charmed crowds and more like a desperate shadow of himself. When the judge entered, Ethan tried to speak, but his words came out as slurred accusations. Margaret presented the police report, photographs of the broken window, the note in Ethan's handwriting. Clarissa testified about the threats, about the nights we had spent in fear. The deputies added their accounts of his violent outbursts. The judge's expression hardened with every word. Finally, she delivered her decision. Ethan was to remain under a strict restraining order, barred from the property, barred from contacting me in any form. Criminal charges were to proceed. Gasps filled the room. Ethan's face twisted, his fists clenching, but he could not speak without being silenced by the bailiff. For once he was powerless, trapped within the very system he thought he could manipulate. As we walked out, reporters again crowded the steps. This time the story was different. The headlines no longer questioned my integrity. They shouted his downfall. Local man faces charges after harassing widow. Ranch heir apparent exposed as fraud. The community that once whispered now rallied. Friends dropped by the ranch with casseroles and kind words. The ranch hands tipped their hats with respect. The weight of their support pressed tears into my eyes. For so long, Ethan's voice had drowned mine out. But now the world was listening to me. And yet, even as the gavel struck against him again, a single thought haunted me. Ethan was cornered. And a cornered man with nothing left to lose could still be deadly. Part 10. In the weeks that followed the last hearing, the ranch grew quiet again. The cattle moved lazily across the pastures, the wind whispered through the oaks, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without fear pressing against my ribs. Ethan was gone. The restraining order held firm, and the criminal charges advanced. He was no longer the man who stood tall in public, commanding rooms with his charm. He was a shadow now, a name spoken only in hushed tones at diners, his downfall replayed in news clips that showed his red face, his rants, his threats. The community that once gave him respect now treated him as an outcast. And I was free. One afternoon, as I walked across the property with Clarissa, the sun low and golden, she slipped her arm through mine. "Dad would be proud, you know," she said softly. "You fought for this land just like he did. You protected it." I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging. I only wish he had never doubted that I could. Ethan tried to convince me I was too weak, too sentimental. But I see now that grief did not break me. It forged me. Clarissa smiled. That is what he never understood. You were never just fighting for land. You were fighting for yourself. She was right. I had stepped into battle unprepared, blindsided by betrayal. I had faced lies, humiliation, and threats that shook me to my core. But through it all, I had learned something powerful. Strength does not come from the absence of fear. It comes from refusing to bow to it. The ranch stood tall because I did. The community saw that too. Neighbors who once whispered about my silence now praised my resolve. Old ranch hands tipped their hats with quiet respect. Even the sheriff, when he visited one evening, said, You handled this with more dignity than most men ever could. And as for Ethan, he faded into the background, consumed by his own rage. His name became a warning, not a legacy. People said, "Do not end up like him." His greed had devoured him, and in the end, all he had left was the echo of what he tried to steal. I often returned to the porch at dusk, the same spot where my father once sat with his tea, watching the land. The sky turns red, the fields hum with cicadas, and I feel his presence in the stillness. I know he left that trust not just to protect the ranch but to protect me. He believed in me even when I doubted myself. And now, as I sit in the chair he left behind, I finally believe it too. This is my land, my family's legacy, my victory. To anyone listening now, hear me. Betrayal can shake you, humiliate you, even make you doubt your worth. But betrayal is also a mirror. It shows you who you are when everything is stripped away. You are stronger than the lies told about you. You are stronger than the people who try to break you. Never let greed, cruelty, or manipulation define your story. Your story belongs to you. I thought Ethan would take everything from me. Instead, he gave me something unexpected: clarity. And clarity is power. So if you are ever standing where I once stood, with the world pressing down, remember this. You can fight back. You can rise. And you can win with truth on your side. Because in the end, truth always outlives the lies. This was my story. Thank you for hearing it. And if you want more stories like mine, of betrayal, of strength, of victory, stay with me. There are so many more truths waiting to be told.